200 years ago, the Founding Fathers produced a resilient and durable instrument of government, the Constitution of the United States. Today, the ideas and hopes of our Founding Fathers are more important than ever as we strive to adapt our institutions to cope with the great problems facing the nation. Time Incorporated has asked a number of distinguished Americans to comment on the Constitution and its relevance to America in 1969. Senator Jacob K. Jaffes, Republican from New York.
Notwithstanding these troubled times, I think we will come through, just as we survived in the first 50 years of our history, wars and deep national divisions which might have rent the nation apart. In my judgment, this is heavily attributable to the unique instrument which determines the American form of government, the Constitution of the United States, a written Constitution, a Constitution guaranteeing the ability to make even radical changes through amendment of the Constitution. Witness the fact that we legislated first that we would not drink spirituous liquors and then legislated that we would drink them. And we can make radical changes, even making this a parliamentary form of government, if we wished, by an amendment to the Constitution. And here, too, the Constitution, the written United States Constitution, is proving itself equal to the task because the rights of free assembly and free press and freedom of religion are giving our people the opportunity for an expression of their views which can result in radical change by amendment of the Constitution and give us an even grander destiny than we've had under the Constitution up to now.
The Democratic candidate for president in 1968, former Vice President Hubert H. Humphrey.
The Founding Fathers produced one of the most remarkable documents ever struck off by the hand of man. But it wasn't easy then, just as it isn't easy now. Now, can we afford to be any less patient and less wise as we grapple with our current problems? Should we expect that our answers will come with less personal sacrifice and dedication than was required of our founders? I don't think so. I believe that every generation of Americans has the task of rebuilding, reconstituting, in a very real sense, the foundations of our democracy. Now, that's what we are about in these challenging times. And as our founders rose above their disagreements 200 years ago, I believe that we shall prevail in our time.
Senator Everett M Dirksen of Illinois, Senate Republican leader, points out a potential danger in our constitutional structure.
In 1932, when I came here, there were only 117 congressmen out of a total of 435. In the election of 1934, there were only 107 out of a total of 435. In the election of 1936, there were only 89 Republican congressmen and only 19 Republican senators. So you see we had less than a third of the total membership. Well, what do you do about it? Because there is definitely an imbalance. And if a strong executive comes to power at the same time that he has an overwhelming majority of Congress, you can see that all manner of legislation by that very force can be driven through and imposed upon the country, and not always for the benefit and the well-being of the country. What should be done about it? Frankly, I have no answer, because this is the people's government. They can do with it whatsoever they like. And so long as they decree this imbalance, I presume we'll live with it.
Democratic Congressman John Conyers Jr. of Michigan, a member of the House Judiciary Committee.
When you look at the economic, political, and the social differences between black and white Americans, I think we can feel that the Constitution in its real sense has not been lived up to in terms of the lives of many of our black citizens. Now, I think that this fundamental problem is tied up into an original defect in the Constitution itself. That is, that somehow or other our founding fathers put together this amazing document, but at the same time thought that they could allow the institution of slavery to exist compatibly along with a new form of democracy. And of course it didn't work out. The Civil War created the end of slavery in this country. Constitutional amendments quickly followed, which provided for supposedly equalizing Americans regardless of their race. But then, of course, the political compromise of 1877, in which the North and the South, Democrats and Republicans, joined in returning the black man to a form of bondage. And I think that one way of looking at it is to ask ourselves, are we going to successfully conclude the second Reconstruction in American history, an attempt to give the Constitution reality and meaning to all of its black and white citizens alike?
Senator Eugene McCarthy of Minnesota speaks out on an issue which formed the substance of his campaign for the presidency in 1968.
I think that if the men who drafted the Constitution had anticipated a time when foreign policy would be as important as it is today, that they would have provided somewhat different procedures for the determination of that policy. There would have been, I think, a much more forceful debate in the Constitutional Convention for the establishment of something closer to the British cabinet system. But the whole thrust then was really against foreign involvement. The concern of the men who drafted the Constitution was largely one which concentrated on our domestic problems, and that was certainly understandable because it's the beginning of a great country and they had the whole continent about which they had to be concerned. Their relationships with Europe had not been particularly favorable, and so to give the Constitution a kind of isolationist and independence of emphasis was clearly understandable. Times are very different now in the 20th century from what they were then. As I said, I don't think it needs a constitutional amendment, that the Constitution is flexible enough, it's open enough, but it certainly requires a change of attitude and a new judgment on the part of all of us who are in politics, and I would hope following that kind of judgment, a gradual and rational change to the point at which Congress and political parties are much more directly involved in the determination of foreign policy, and the great concentration of that power, which is moved to the executive branch of the government, will be dispersed. I don't know whether this would mean we'd have a better foreign policy, but I think we'd have one which is more consistent with the principles of American democracy, and one which I think in the long run would have better popular understanding and better popular support. It would also tend to free us from the danger of a kind of personalized foreign policy, which is very clearly possible under existing practices.
Republican Minority Leader in the House of Representatives, Congressman Gerald R of Michigan, wants an end to the controversy over how we elect a president.
Perhaps few Americans realize they do not vote directly for the President of the United States. Even if the names of the candidates appear on the ballot of their state, that state's votes for president are cast by presidential electors representing that state. And the electors are not bound by law to cast their votes for the candidate carrying that state. The Constitution allows each state to name as many electors as the state has representatives and senators. A presidential candidate must get a majority of the electoral vote or the election is thrown into the House of Representatives, where each state gets one vote, and none at all if the congressmen from that state are evenly divided as to how to cast the state's vote.
Senate Republican Whip Hugh Scott of Pennsylvania is concerned about the problems being created by an expanding urban America.
The wonder
of our Constitution is this. It was a contract drawn with a rural society in mind, with men who had their roots in the earth. But it serves an urban America remarkably well nearly 2 centuries later. The Constitution has been a living and growing organism. It has built-in flexibility through the amending process, which has allowed it to absorb the tremendous changes that have occurred in American society since the 18th century. Yet the basic document today, when 3/4 of the nation's 200 million people live on only 2% of the land, is still unchanged. As we move into the 21st century, we must maintain the same flexibility and foresight, which is a hallmark of our Constitution. In dealing with our urban crises of housing, pollution, crime, unemployment, for example, we look beyond our cities back to our rural areas. We should extend our thinking to embrace, as one of a number of solutions, the possibility of rejuvenating rural America with jobs and opportunities to help ease the pressures on our cities. As we in government, in private industry, and as individuals grapple with these modern problems, it must be kept in mind that men, not laws nor documentaries, will find the solutions. We must explore many different approaches and seek out many new ideas. In the end, we must relate them all to that great document, our Constitution, which embodies the spirit of our nation, as well as the spirit of the laws, and makes it unique in all the world.
Veteran New York Congressman Emmanuel, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, emphasizes the importance of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, commonly called the Bill of Rights.
And why do we have these Bill of Rights? Because in our history of the English-speaking peoples, we had violent and evil-provoking kings and tyrants who refused to grant the right of petition, who refused to grant the right of religion, freedom of faith, and free press, and free speech, which caused so much difficulty. And therefore, to ensure those rights, the Founding Fathers embedded those very rights, and there could be no denial of those rights, into the Constitution itself. And too often, when provoked and as a result of hysteria, which now seem to prevail a bit because of the riots and demonstrations that occur, we're likely to forget those rights and trample upon those rights. But we must always remember in the background stand these rights, which are necessary for us to protect, because our democracy is founded upon those very liberties involved in those rights.
Senator Birch Bai of Indiana, chairman of the Senate subcommittee dealing with constitutional amendments, wants to put the presidential election process in order.
In my judgment, one of the most critical governmental reforms we need now today is a constitutional amendment, which would overhaul dramatically the way in which we choose our president. I think the time has come really to abolish the Electoral College system, because that system, which was established almost 200 years ago, could not anticipate many changes which have subsequently occurred. For example, our forefathers did not foresee the development of the political party system. Shortly after the first and second elections of presidents, we had a great controversy between President Adams and his vice presidential candidate, Aaron Burr, which resulted in a near tragedy in a youthful nation and subsequently necessitated the 12th Amendment to the Constitution. Our forefathers could not see the development of a massive public education system, which now gives us a learned and intelligent electorate instead of an uneducated one, of a wilderness country.